Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name's Stephen. I'm a traditionally published fantasy author. Today I thought I'd do a little bit of a roundup of what happened at Fantasycon, which is an annual science fiction and fantasy event convention that's held in the UK. But to begin with, I'm going to talk a little bit about the agent panel, which is probably most of interest to those of you who are looking to be traditionally published. And then after that I'll go on to do a bit more of a general roundup. So that's what I'm going to focus on today. The panel on how to get published or how to find a literary agent was with 3 agents. Unfortunately, one of them was ill with COVID, so there's just 2 agents, who was Juliet Mushins, who's actually my literary agent, and Ed Wilson. Ed Wilson is a UK literary agent who represents people like Shauna Lawless, RJ Barker, who writes epic fantasy, Shauna, of course, does historical fantasy, and a whole host of other authors. You can go onto his website and find him and find a list of authors that he represents. So they were being asked questions about what does an agent do, how does it work, and they covered some of the things that I've spoken about in the past, but I thought I'd do a little bit of an update for those of you who haven't gone back and watched some of the other videos. So there's a number of ones that I've done about writing a synopsis, writing a covering letter, how I found a literary agent, and I'll put a link down below to some of those for you to look at if you haven't gone back and watched them. But I'll just step through some of the things that they talked about in this panel and give you a bit of a refresher. The first place they said to look for a literary agent was to start with the Writers and Artists Yearbook. In every video I post a number of links, a number of notes, and in the notes section under resources of my video there's a link to the Writers and Artists Yearbook. You can look at it online, but you can also buy a physical copy if you want every year. And this is essentially like a massive dictionary. Every year the organisers of this book contact all literary agents, ask them for their name, the name of the agents, the genres that they represent, their website, phone number, email, all this kind of stuff, and it's this massive kind of compendium. And both Ed and Juliet said, use this as a starter for 10. If you haven't got the money to buy one, you can go to your local library and you should be able to find one of them, the older ones. But because they are only updated every 12 months, they said use that only as the starting point, because agents move, some retire, some go to other places, some switch genres. So use that book to draw up a short list of all of the agents that match your genre and have interest that you think might suit your books when they talk about their wish list, or there's got any other information there. And then from that, then take that information online and find out, have any of the agents moved? Have they changed genre? What are their contact details? Are they currently open or not to submission? Because agents will have periods where they have an open window, you can send in your book, your first few chapters, whatever it might be, and then they kind of close their door for a while to try and catch up with all the submissions list, because it's first in, first out. And as they build up, they get quite a lot, hundreds, every month, thousands every year, and so they want to get through them. Sometimes they close the window. So find the information for all the agents, draw it all up, get their contact details, and they all said pay close attention to what each agent asks for. So if the first agent says, send me the first 5 chapters, and the second agent says, send me the first 3 chapters, don't just send 5 chapters to both. Meet the requirements exactly. Pay attention to the naming structure, if it's Mr. or Mrs. or Ms., whatever it might be, the preferred form of address. Get it right. Do your homework. They also said you should send out your inquiries in small batches. Don't burn through everything all at once. Let's say there are 30 agents that meet your requirements for your particular genre and that are currently open to submission now. They both said send them out in batches of maybe 6 to 10 at once. Send it out and see what feedback you get, if any. If they all give you standard just no thank yous, that's something. But if you get feedback from any of them that's useful, you can then use that information to revise it before sending out to the next batch. If you send it all to all of them at once in one go, a massive kind of blunderbuss approach, then you can't revise the book and send it back to them again, because you've burnt that bridge. You'd have to then go back to them with another book. So definitely do it in batches. The other thing both agents said is that because they get so many submissions every year, they can't keep track of everything and they won't remember every single name. So if you send out a book and it's rejected by one of the agents, but they give a little bit of information, a little bit of feedback, when you send them another book, it's perfectly fine to say, last year or 2 years ago, I sent you a book about so-and-so and you said this was particularly good, or that I should go and work on X, and I've now gone and done that with this new submission. So it just forms a little bit of a connection, a little bit of a reminder for them, because they can't be expected to remember every single submission that they've had through the door, because they get thousands every year. So a little bit of courtesy, a little bit of kind of build a connection is a really good idea. They also spoke about the importance of a covering letter and a synopsis versus the actual material that you send. And Ed's attitude was very much that they are important, but they're not the absolute be-all and end-all. If the synopsis is quite good and the covering letter is relatively okay, but the book is excellent, then that will win out every time. Obviously, you should pay attention to your covering letter and your synopsis, and you should spend a lot of time working on them in terms of getting it right, spell checking it so many times, making it concise, making it interesting, following the rules and guidelines or the themes and structures that other people have done in theirs, to use an example to help you when you do yours. There's lots of other ones online you can reference and get feedback from people, get someone else to read it. But the material is what both agents said is absolutely key. That is the critical and most important thing. You should polish it and polish it and polish it until it absolutely gleams and you're really happy with it. Then it's ready to go out. They had a number of questions from the audience, and one was from someone who said they're currently working on 2 books in 2 different genres. What should they do? Could they go with both at the same time? And both agents said that when you're trying to debut, when you're trying to establish yourself as a traditionally published author, it's fairly common to spend one time in one genre before moving on to something else. And you kind of have to do that because the publisher is investing a lot of time and money and marketing to promote you within the industry, to bookshops, to booksellers, to everybody as you write this particular genre. If you then go and straight away try and do something else in a totally different genre, it's basically resetting the button because you're effectively a brand new person with a brand new audience. And so you've lost any kind of momentum. Now, authors can change genres, but they have to have been established for a little while first. And Ed Wilson, who gave one example, of course, is his own client, R.J. Barker, who has done 2 trilogies, adult fantasy with Orbit Books, but he's also diversified. Now he has a pen name, R.J. Dark, and he's writing crime novels in parallel. So they're very different audiences, and they have some overlaps, but not enormous amounts. And he's able to pursue both at the same time because he is still writing within a fantasy genre. He has a new series coming out next year with Orbit, but he's also doing some crime on the side too. Others have done this. They've used pen names and gone off and done different genres, but it's not something you can do straight away. So when this person was asked, working on 2 books, the question sent back to them was, well, which one speaks to you the most? Which genre do you prefer? Which genre do you want to explore and spend more time in? That's the one you should focus on initially. There was also some talk of word count, particularly with fantasy books, which can be quite lengthy. And one of the considerations that the agents talked about was that when you look at a book in the first of a series, and if it's the first of a trilogy, that isn't too bad. But if you've got like a 10-book series, selling something like that these days is incredibly tough. And you also have to think about the cost of physically producing the book, with paper and ink now going up and printing costs being much higher. Then there's things to think about like translation rights. So any book that's translated from English, particularly into German, the word count will jump something like 20% in terms of the page count. So if you have a 180,000 word book and then you translate it into German, the book is going to get that much physically bigger. So that's another consideration that when they're trying to sell it overseas can be more difficult. That's not to say you can't have big chunky doorstopper fantasy books, but if you're a debut author and you come in with something that's a little bit slimmer and also a shorter series, that's an easier sell than coming in straight away with a 250, 300,000 word book and it's the first of 6 or 7 or 10 book series. Selling that to a literary agent would be incredibly difficult, and therefore selling it to a publisher would be harder as well. Other factors that I've spoken about in the past, they touched on as well, that aren't important in terms of a social media presence, in terms of your age. In terms of location, they said if you can get an agent within your country, that's great. So if you're in the UK, you can try and get a UK one, and if you're in America, the same. It doesn't have to be, but sometimes it's just a little easier in terms of communication if you're in the same time zone as people. But Juliet does have some clients of hers that are in America, other parts of the world as well. But it can be handy if you're in the same time zone to be able to ring someone up email them and get a response within a few hours, because publishing is quite slow, traditional publishing, but then it moves very quickly for a bit and then it slows down again because it's a much longer life cycle from start to finish compared to self-publishing. So being able to have that immediate communication with someone can be quite handy. They also spoke about what an agent does once the deal is signed in terms of working with the contracts to make sure that those are all right, trying to sell the books internationally to other countries to then be translated into other territories. Sometimes they'll work with film and television rights, or there'll be a separate agent to do that. It depends upon the literary agent. So there's lots of other work. The work doesn't stop with the agent once they've sort of got you a publisher. That's just the beginning. The other thing is they obviously negotiate with the publisher on your behalf in terms of arranging the advance, and then they speak to them about the next thing that's coming up. They warm them up and sort of say, this is what you're working on, and keep an eye on the market and talk to the editors all the time. So they're constantly being fed information so that the agents know what's going on so they can stay up to date, which then benefits you. For when you come to pitch the next thing to your agent, they might say to you, actually that's not a good fit for the market now, and if we sold it today and it comes out next year or the year after, it's not going to fit. Or they might say, that's perfect, I've been speaking to some agents and they're really keen for something like that, this is a great fit. And you don't have access to that information where they're being fed it all the time by talking to all these other editors. So their job doesn't stop when you sign on with them, and it doesn't stop when they've signed that first contract. They're always working for you, being your champion, and they're always in your corner. So that was just a quick roundup of the agent panel. Other things that went on at the event, which was a 2-day event instead of a 3-day one. If you've never been to Fantasycon, I should say that it's one of several annual events that we have. There's Fantasycon, which is usually around the September-October time. There's EasterCon, which again is a science fiction and fantasy one, around sort of end of March, start of April, and that moves around the country as well too. It's normally 2 or 3 days, takes place in a hotel somewhere, and hundreds of fans and agents and editors and publishers gather together, and we have panels and readings and discussions and sometimes book launches. And this year it was great to meet up with all of the friends that I normally see and talk to online and see them in person. But also we had some great international visitors coming over for the first time. People I've spoken to online but haven't had a chance to meet. So Ryan Carhill, who's a self-published author, was on a couple of panels with me. And of course Zach Argyle came over from America with his wife Bookborn. Hilary, who does a booktube channel. And it was great to talk to them, have a chat with them in person. I hope to get both of them on the channel in the future. We might try and do a live stream and talk about publishing and writing and our experiences. I was on a couple of panels. One was to do with bringing other genres into fantasy. So some of my books have crime elements and horror and supernatural. And the other one was about writing as an author and having sort of longevity. What do you do after that debut series? And it's an interesting split on that panel. There was Juliet McKenna and Liz Williams, who was the guest of honour, and they've been in the business, both of them, for much longer. And on the other side, there's myself and Ryan, who's self-published, and obviously I'm traditionally published. And there's it wasn't exactly old guns versus new, but they had a lot more experience and perspective, whereas we've been in the business far less. And so we were seeing things perhaps with fresh eyes. Ryan in particular, with all of his knowledge of self-publishing, was very, very new to me and to some of the others. There's so much information that he had, all the research that he's done, all the homework that he put in, and then he's become, very successful within the last 2 years. It was great to hear about new techniques and new changes in the industry, and how it's not just you have to be one or the other. You can have hybrid authors these days, and that could be something I might pursue in the future with some self-publishing alongside my traditionally published work. The main benefit for me for going to these events, and for people who are trying to get published or just fans, is you get to meet the authors, get books signed, talk to them, listen to them on panels. But I went to a number of these events over the years when I was trying to get published, to gather as much information as I could from agents, editors and other authors who were there, talking about their experiences, talking about how they found an agent, how they got a book deal, talking about their experiences with self-publishing and what's been going on with them. So if you have a local event or there's something you can get to and it's within your genre, I would definitely say go to it if you can. You'll get so much from it by being a part of the community, making new contacts, making new friends, and they're just really energizing for me. I come away feeling like I want to get back on and start writing again, even though they're quite usually long days and nights with long nights in the bar, and there was karaoke one night and all this kind of stuff, and they're great fun. So in the UK, as I mentioned, there are a couple. Next year's Fantasycon is already set. The date will be around September time again, and it's taking place in Birmingham, UK. So keep an eye on the British Fantasy Society website, keep an eye on their social media or mine, and once we have more information about that, I'll put up links and put information out, and also on the community tab. So if you are in the UK, or you can come to the UK next year to attend Fantasycon, that's something you might want to consider if you're a science fiction but are predominantly a fantasy writer. I'd highly recommend doing it. It's really good fun. It's a really great experience. You'll meet a lot of great people. So if you can, go to an event like this or one close to you and your home. So just a bit of a roundup video today. That's all I'm going to talk about. I'll be back next week with another video.